Have you ever noticed that women over 50 no longer run after the same things they once thought were essential? In their 20s and 30s, love was often pursued like a prize, a fire they were taught to tend at all costs. It wasn't simply about personal desire, it was woven into culture, family, tradition, and even survival. To be chosen, to be partnered, to be loved, was presented as the summit of a woman's worth. She was measured by the presence of a ring, a home, a family, or the way she could hold a man's attention. But as decades pass, the urgency fades. Something inside begins to transform. Women cross the invisible threshold of 50, and suddenly the chase no longer feels necessary. They stop looking for validation in another person's eyes. They begin to walk slower, calmer, more deliberate. They no longer burn themselves out trying to be desirable. They realize that the race for external approval was never the true path to wholeness. And this is precisely the shift Carl Jung spoke of when he described the second half of life as a time when the psyche turns inward, demanding a confrontation with the self instead of constant adaptation to the outer world. For Jung, the first half of life is about building careers, identities, relationships, families. It is the stage of masks, of personas, of fitting into what society demands. But after midlife, the unconscious calls a person to let go of those roles and begin the deeper work of individuation, of becoming whole. And for many women, this individuation expresses itself through the release of the frantic chase for love. They stop exhausting themselves to be what others want them to be. They begin to ask, what do I want, not just from love, but from life? The cultural narrative does not prepare women for this transformation. It still whispers, even screams, that their worth is tied to their ability to attract, to nurture, to hold together relationships. But when a woman steps into her 50s, she has already lived decades under those expectations. She has seen the illusions, tasted the disappointments, carried the weight of compromises, and slowly she begins to realize that love, at least in the form she was told to chase, is not the highest truth. This realization is not born out of bitterness, as some mistakenly believe. It is born out of clarity, out of exhaustion with false promises, out of deeper wisdom that understands that to chase love endlessly is to abandon oneself. Women over 50 stop chasing because they finally see that the only love worth having is one that flows naturally, without begging, without bending, without burning themselves to ashes for it. Jung might call this a reconciliation with the shadow. In youth, women often project their unlived desires, fears, and wounds onto others, particularly partners. They chase relationships, hoping those partners will heal what is unhealed within themselves. But after 50, many women recognize the futility of that cycle. They see that no one else can carry their shadow for them. They must face it themselves. And in doing so, they realize they no longer need to chase someone else to feel complete. When a woman reaches her 50s, she enters a psychological territory Jung described as the afternoon of life. This is not merely about age or physical changes. It is about the shifting orientation of the soul. The morning of life, as Jung put it, is outward-facing. We strive, we compete, we prove ourselves. We seek recognition from others. In the afternoon, the psyche demands the opposite. It asks for reflection, integration, and truth. For women, this shift often reveals itself through their relationship with love. For decades, they may have equated love with survival. Society reinforced this at every turn. Movies, books, traditions, even family gatherings. The idea that a woman without a partner is incomplete is so deeply ingrained that many women spent their most vibrant years twisting themselves into shapes just to be loved. They learned to hide their anger, to soften their ambition, to prioritize others' needs above their own. They gave and gave, believing that sacrifice was proof of worthiness. But sacrifice without reciprocity becomes resentment. And by the time a woman steps into her 50s, she has often accumulated a lifetime of disappointments, disguised as lessons. She remembers the partners who demanded without giving, the compromises that chipped away at her authenticity, the quiet moments when she wondered if she was invisible, even while sharing a home or a bed. These memories, once buried under the distractions of raising children or working long hours, resurface when life slows down. This resurfacing can feel brutal. Solitude, whether chosen or imposed, exposes the illusions of the past. Jung warned that what we repress will return, often with greater force in midlife. The woman who spent years repressing her anger suddenly finds herself unable to ignore it. The woman who silenced her creativity to keep peace in a marriage suddenly feels restless, even rebellious. The woman who spent years waiting for love to save her realizes she has been waiting for someone who never arrives, and so she stops chasing. Not because she no longer believes in love, but because she has outgrown the version of love she was taught to desire. Romantic ideals rooted in dependency, sacrifice, or fantasy no longer satisfy. She no longer wants a savior because she has discovered that she is capable of saving herself. She no longer wants to lose herself in passion because she has already experienced the cost of being lost. Instead, she begins to desire something different: reciprocity, depth, presence. And if that is not available, she prefers solitude to compromise. The body tells its own truth at this stage as well. With age comes the undeniable awareness of mortality. Beauty standards that once pressured her into diets, makeup, and endless self-surveillance lose their grip. She realizes that no matter how hard she fights, she will never be 25 again. Instead of despairing, many women discover liberation in this. They recognize that invisibility to society's gaze can become a kind of shield, a cloak under which they are free to reinvent themselves. No longer burdened by the constant demand to be attractive or desirable, they turn their energy inward, to art, to spirituality, to friendships that nourish rather than drain. This is what Jung meant when he spoke about individuation, the process of integrating the neglected parts of the psyche and becoming whole. For women, individuation after 50 often looks like reclaiming pieces of themselves that were sacrificed on the altar of love. The young artist who gave up painting to care for children picks up her brush again. The woman who suppressed her anger begins to speak with clarity and authority. The dreamer who once longed for travel books, a ticket to see the world alone. These are not acts of despair. They are acts of reclamation, yet to the outside world they may appear unsettling. A woman who stops chasing love is often branded as cold, bitter, or too independent. These judgments reveal more about society's discomfort than about the woman herself. For centuries, female identity has been defined in relation to others, as daughter, wife, mother, caregiver. When a woman rejects this script and claims her life as her own, she destabilizes the cultural narrative. She reveals a truth many fear to acknowledge, that love is not the only path to fulfillment, and that selfhood does not require permission. There is also a spiritual dimension here. Jung observed that in the second half of life, many people experience a shift toward deeper, even mystical forms of meaning. The drive for outer achievement wanes, and the hunger for inner peace intensifies. Women over 50 often embody this shift with grace. They begin to cultivate practices that nourish the soul: meditation, journaling, prayer, or simple silence. They no longer chase love in others because they have discovered the necessity of cultivating love within. This is not to say they no longer want companionship. Many still do, but the difference is that the desire is no longer desperate, no longer tied to self-worth. They are not willing to shrink themselves to fit into someone else's life. They are not willing to beg for crumbs of attention. They would rather wait for a love that meets them as equals, or not at all. In this way, women over 50 embody a paradox. On one hand, they seem invisible to the world that once judged them by their desirability. On the other hand, they have never been more visible to themselves. They see their own patterns, their own strength, their own truth with clarity. They stop chasing love because they have found something more enduring, themselves. And that, Jung would say, is the ultimate task of the second half of life. Not to chase, not to perform, but to integrate. To live not for approval, but for authenticity. For women over 50, the end of the chase is not a loss. It is the beginning of wholeness. One of Jung's most profound insights is that what we repress becomes part of our shadow. For women, especially those conditioned in patriarchal cultures, the shadow often contains traits society discouraged: ambition, anger, assertiveness, sensuality, even selfishness. In their youth, many women were told these qualities were unfeminine, unattractive, or disruptive to relationships. To be loved, they learned to hide them. They learned to smile instead of protest, to accommodate instead of demand, to nurture instead of pursue their own desires. But shadows do not disappear simply because we suppress them. They wait. And in midlife, particularly after 50, the shadow insists on being acknowledged. Jung observed that ignoring the shadow leads to bitterness, projection, and stagnation, while integrating it leads to authenticity and freedom. For many women, stopping the chase for love is intimately tied to this shadow work. Consider anger. A younger woman may have swallowed her rage at an inattentive partner because she feared being abandoned. By 50, abandonment is no longer the worst thing that can happen to her. She has survived heartbreak, disappointment, and perhaps even the collapse of long marriages. She knows she can stand alone. Suddenly, she feels permission to express the anger she once buried. She speaks her truth without apology. This does not make her cruel. It makes her real. And when love is no longer the goal, truth becomes the compass. Or take ambition. A woman in her 20s or 30s may have muted her career aspirations for the sake of family harmony. She may have worked part-time, taken jobs beneath her skill level, or abandoned dreams entirely. After 50, with children grown or obligations shifted, she feels the pull of that ambition again. She no longer seeks approval from a partner who might feel threatened by her success. She no longer fears that ambition will make her unlovable. She simply recognizes it as part of her authentic self that must be lived. This reclamation of shadow qualities explains why many women over 50 seem to reinvent themselves. They return to school, start businesses, write books, or embark on spiritual pilgrimages. To outsiders, it may look as though they are turning their backs on love. But what they are really doing is turning toward wholeness. Society struggles to understand this. Popular culture bombards us with images of women chasing romance well into old age, as if desirability is the only form of relevance. Romantic comedies with older heroines often end with them finding a partner, as though that is the ultimate validation of their journey. The idea that a woman could be fulfilled without chasing or securing love rarely appears, yet Jung would argue that this fulfillment is precisely the purpose of the second half of life. There is also a biological factor to consider. The end of fertility changes everything. In societies that tie a woman's value to her ability to bear children, menopause can feel like an erasure. But paradoxically, many women experience it as liberation. Free from the hormonal cycles that govern so much of their youth, they report a newfound clarity and calm. Desire shifts from procreation-driven urgency to soulful connection, or in some cases to the pure joy of solitude. No longer pressured by biology, women are free to ask, what do I truly want? The answer is rarely to chase. Chasing is exhausting, degrading, and rooted in lack. It requires one to believe something essential is missing. By 50, many women realize nothing is missing. What they sought in others, validation, comfort, companionship, they can cultivate within themselves. When they stop chasing, they discover that love in its highest form is not about clinging, but about presence. This transformation also has ripple effects on society. A woman who refuses to chase love challenges the cultural scripts that keep power imbalanced. She shows younger women that worth is not tied to relationship status. She demonstrates that it is possible to age with dignity, power, and freedom, without the desperate pursuit of external validation. She becomes a living embodiment of individuation, a self who exists for her own wholeness rather than for approval. And yet, it is important to note that this shift does not mean women stop desiring connection. What changes is the nature of the desire. They crave authenticity, not performance, depth, not distraction, equality, not dependence. They want a love that mirrors the integration they are undergoing within themselves. If such a love appears, they welcome it, but they will not compromise their soul's integrity for its sake. The archetypal shift here is remarkable. In Jungian terms, a woman over 50 is moving from the archetype of the maiden or mother to the crone. The crone is not a withered, irrelevant figure, as patriarchal interpretations have painted her. She is the wise one, the truth-teller, the woman who sees beyond illusions. She stops chasing love because she has become love, embodied, grounded, fierce, and compassionate. To chase would be to diminish herself. This archetypal transition is evident in myth and story across cultures. In Greek mythology, Hecate represents the crone, guiding souls through darkness with her torch. In Celtic lore, the Cailleach is the powerful winter goddess who commands storms and reshapes the land. In native traditions, elder women are often revered as keepers of wisdom. These stories reveal what Jung emphasized. The second half of life is not decline but initiation. Women over 50 are not fading, they are transforming, and yet transformation requires courage. To stop chasing love means confronting fears of loneliness, irrelevance, and mortality. Many women wrestle with these fears in silence, but as Jung suggested, facing the shadow of fear is necessary for growth. When they embrace solitude, when they lean into invisibility, they discover that loneliness can be alchemized into creative power, invisibility into freedom, mortality into meaning. Thus, the body section of this exploration comes to a pivotal realization. Women over 50 stop chasing love not because they have given up, but because they have awakened. They understand that love worth having cannot be chased, it must be met, and if it is never met, they remain whole nonetheless. The story of women over 50 is not a narrative of decline, but of revelation. When Jung spoke of the afternoon of life, he described a turning point where the soul demands truth over illusion, wholeness over performance, and authenticity over approval. For women, this turning point often reveals itself in their relationship with love. No longer willing to contort themselves to be chosen, no longer willing to sacrifice their essence for validation, they step into a radical power, the power of no longer chasing. This shift is not about bitterness. It is not about rejecting companionship or turning cold toward intimacy. It is about refusing to make love an idol that consumes selfhood. It is about releasing the myth that love must be pursued at all costs, and instead allowing love, when it comes, to be a gift freely given, not a prize earned through sacrifice. In this, women over 50 embody one of Jung's deepest truths. The soul's task is individuation, not assimilation. To become whole, one must integrate the neglected, the hidden, and the shadowed parts of the self. For decades, women have been told to seek wholeness in others. Fairy tales began with longing and ended with marriage, as though love was the pinnacle of existence. Entire industries have been built on women's insecurities, urging them to dye their hair, smooth their wrinkles, slim their bodies, all for the promise of remaining desirable, of remaining chosen. But women over 50 have lived long enough to see through this illusion. They have been chosen and still felt empty. They have been abandoned and discovered they could endure. They have been invisible and realized invisibility can be a cloak of freedom. To stop chasing love, then, is not an act of defeat, but of defiance. It is a refusal to buy into the lie that a woman's worth expires when she is no longer the object of male desire. It is the recognition that she is not an accessory in someone else's story, but the author of her own. In the silence that comes when the chase ends, something extraordinary emerges, her own voice. And what does she do with that voice? She creates. She mentors. She speaks truth without trembling. She paints, writes, travels, prays, meditates. She loves, but not in the way she was told to love. She loves expansively. Her friends, her grandchildren, her community, the earth, her own body. She cultivates the kind of love that does not demand pursuit, because it flows from an endless well within. This is the paradox Jung warned us about, that what seems like loss is often transformation. The loss of youthful desirability makes way for wisdom. The loss of chasing makes way for stillness. The loss of illusions makes way for truth. In stopping the chase, women over 50 are not rejecting love but redefining it. They are saying, I will not run after something that depletes me. I will stand still, whole, and let love come if it dares to meet me here.